Hello kids. So today I'll be starting with Unit 2 of AP Microeconomics. So AP Microeconomics Unit 2 is what I'll start today. Unit 2 is demand and supply. All right. So before that, okay, let me just walk you through the curriculum of demand and supply. So this is the one, that's the weightage, and that's the multiple choice questions, approximately 25, and then you might have free response questions from this, short ones, and then the big idea is this. Then this is the unit at glance. So demand, supply, price elasticity of demand, price elasticity of supply, other elasticities, market equilibrium and consumer and producer surplus, market disequilibrium and changes in equilibrium, the effects of government intervention in markets, and international trade and public policy. So that's what we have to cover in Unit 2. I'll start with demand today. Demand is a big topic, so I have actually split it into two parts. So in today's videos, I'll be doing the half of it, and the next video that will be coming up will have the other half of demand. All right. Okay, so first of all, let's just start with demand. All right. All right. So what do you understand by demand? Okay. Now, demand, usually students say that it's what we want or what we need, right? So, but I'll give you you know examples explaining that that's not just demand. Okay, demand is basically amount of goods and services that consumers are willing and able to buy at various prices in a given time period. All right. Now, two things that you have to really look at in this is willingness to buy, and able to buy. Both of these. So if both of these things are satisfied, then only we say that it's a demand for a particular product or service. So for example, let's say if I want to buy a Corvette, all right, I want to buy a Corvette. So I am willing to buy a Corvette, but then I don't have the money to buy the Corvette. So I'm not able to buy Corvette. All right. I'm willing to buy Corvette. There is willingness, but I'm not able to buy Corvette. So it won't be counted as demand from a market perspective. All right. So it's not a demand. And let's say if it's the other way around, I have the budget to buy a Corvette, right? I'm able to buy a Corvette. So I have, the income to buy the Corvette, but then I don't want to buy a Corvette because I don't like Corvette, let's say. Okay. So in that case also, it will not be counted as demand. Okay, when both of these things are satisfied, only then we count that as demand from a market perspective, right? So the companies that analyze the demand, or when they do demand estimation, they take into account both of these factors, the willingness of the consumers as well as the ability of the consumers to buy at various prices, okay, a given product or service. So remember that. All right. Okay. Then, so that's basically your demand. All right. Then let's look at, this is a theoretical one, right? I mean, a concept, right? Now let's just look at how do we derive it. Okay. So this is the written thing about demand, right? If I want to say, or if I want to show this as a graphical representation, right? If I want to show demand as a graphical representation, then it basically is termed as the demand curve. All right. So demand curve is nothing but a graphical representation of quantity demanded by a consumer at various price levels. All right. So if I just want to know demand, I mean, a definition of demand, yeah, that's what is it. Now, when I represent that demand definition graphically, that becomes my demand curve. All right. So curve is basically a graphical representation of quantity demanded by a consumer at various price levels, right? That's the only difference. Okay. So demand curve is the graphical representation. Demand as such is the technical definition that we talk about demand. Okay. Now, what we will do is that's very important and interesting for you, and you really have to understand how this is how this demand curve is derived actually. So demand curve derivation. Okay. And here we bring in back the consumer theory that we had done. So demand curve derivation from your marginal utility per dollar concept, right? So I hope you remember that law of equimarginal utility, right? That's marginal utility per dollar concept. So we'll derive the demand curve from that so that we understand various aspects of demand curve. We understand why the demand curve is downward sloping, why at various prices, as the price falls, the demand increases, and as the price goes up, the demand decreases, right? Why that happens, all right? So we'll derive that from the marginal utility per dollar aspect, or per dollar, the marginal utility per dollar concept, okay? All right. So for that, I'll start with a little table. So I have here granola bars with me, let's say. Okay. And I have here fruit. Okay. Now, the quantity, the marginal utility, and then I'll come to the next column later. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the marginal utility, respective marginal utility is 100, 80, 60, and 40, let's say. So hypothetically, I have given this table to you. Let's say that's what the quantity consumption of granola bars is for me, let's say, and marginal utility derived from it. All right. Similarly, from fruit, I have, so it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I have 120, I have 100, I have 50, and I have 20. All right. Now with this, I have been given the information that my price of, okay, I'll write that further down. Okay. So with this, I have also been given that my price of granola bar is $1 and price of fruit is equal to $2 per lb. All right. So that's one. So I have this now. We all know that in order to attain the utility maximization solution, right? Where do I get utility maximization? So how much quantities of granola bars and fruit I should consume so that I get utility maximization? I need to equate my utility, marginal utility actually, right, with the per dollar thing for both of them, right? I did this in my last video. I did the whole free response question on this in my last video, okay, if you remember. And yes, just a little information. So I also take one-on-one classes for AP Micro and AP Macroeconomics. So if any one of you is interested, you can always contact me. My number is 9818787071. All right, I do give lots of preparation tests and MCQs and free response questions for you to practice after I'm done with the units. After each unit, I keep giving them so that the student is in can review all those topics that we have done already in the units. All right. Okay, so marginal utility per dollar, given the price of granola bar is 1. I have 100, 80, 60, and 40 because the price is just $1. And here I'll have price is $2, so I'll have 60, 50, 25, and 10. All right, now let's just see that where these two equate, right? So it's 60, right? 60, they both are equal. 60 and 60, they both are equal. Now, in this particular question, I don't have an income constraint, so I don't look at that income constraint, right? I have not given you the income. In my previous question, I had the income constraint. But since here I don't have, and only one number matches, per unit, per dollar, only one marginal utility matches. So there is no confusion. So 60, 60. So basically, this person or I will be consuming 3 units of granola bars and 1 unit of fruit. All right, that will give me utility maximization for me. All right, now let's say that now the price of granola bar increases to $2. Okay, all right, before that, let me just write two things. So I have, this is granola bars, all right. I'll just create another table saying the price of granola bar and the quantity consumed of granola bar by me. So when the price for was $1, I was consuming 3 units of granola bars, right? Okay, with this. Okay, taking into account my marginal utility per dollar concept, right? All right. Now, let's say the price of granola bar increases. It increases to $2. Only granola bar price increases to $2. Now, when it increases to $2, I have a new marginal utility per dollar per dollar table with the new price, which is $2. So in that case, my numbers would be 50, 40, 30, and 20, since I'll divide my marginal utility by 2. All right. Now let's look at where do I get the maximum utility maximization, right? Given now this is my marginal utility per dollar of granola price, and this is my marginal utility per dollar of fruit price, right? Because the prices of fruits haven't changed. So now in this, where do I get equal numbers? I get equal numbers at this 50, 50 and 50. Right? So basically it means that I'll be consuming 1 unit of granola bar and I'll be consuming 2 units of fruits, right? So with the price going up to $2, I'll be consuming only 1 unit of granola bar, right? Do you understand this? So what has happened? What has happened is basically an increase in the price of good, right? When the price of granola bar increases from 1 to 2, marginal utility per dollar basically for granola bar decreases because price, which is in the denominator, goes up. So the whole fraction decreases. Now that basically means that the marginal utility that the consumer is deriving from that product goes down, right? From by spending that one last dollar, the marginal utility that the consumer is deriving from that product goes down. And when it goes down, basically the consumption of that product by the consumer also goes down, because now the consumer is deriving less of marginal utility from the product. So obviously he'll be demanding less of that product in the market. So that is why, the quantity demanded falls with the increase in the price of the product. If we relate that to the concept of marginal utility per dollar concept. Or in other words, in very simple terms, I can explain this giving, with this. So this is what the law of diminishing marginal utility actually talks about, right? All this happens because of that law. This law of diminishing marginal utility, actually explains that why, as the price of the product increases, the quantity demanded by a consumer goes down. Because as the price of the product keeps increasing, the marginal utility deriving from that product keeps on diminishing, right, per dollar. And that is why the consumer consumes less of that commodity. Do you understand this? Right? So that's the basic idea behind your inverse relationship between your price and quantity demanded. Right? So as the price of the product increases, the quantity demanded for that product decreases. If the price of the product decreases, the quantity demanded for that product increases. So we end up having an inverse relation between price and the quantity demanded based on the law of diminishing marginal utility, or the marginal utility per dollar concept, one and the same thing, right? Okay. All right. I hope you understand this. And now this leads us to draw the graph for this, right? Which will be, give me a minute, right? Okay. So sorry about this. So give me a minute. All right. So for that, what will be the graph? The graph will be something like this. This is your quantity demanded. And this is your price. Let's say if I draw for the same good, if I draw for granola bars, right? I draw this graph for granola bars. So when the price was 1, the quantity demanded was, let's say, what was it? When the price was 1, the quantity demanded was 3, right? Okay, I'll mark that. Okay, so when the price was 1, quantity demanded was 3, so I get 1 point over here. When the price increased to 2, the quantity demanded decreased to 1. So I have a point over here. Now, when I join these 2 points, if I extend this line just like this, right? Because that's what I'll get. There's an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. What I get is the demand curve. All right. So demand curve is downward sloping. Yes. Why? Because of your law of diminishing marginal utility, right? Because as the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases and vice versa, right? And that is explained by why that happens is explained by law of diminishing marginal utility. Law of diminishing, I'm sorry, marginal utility. Marginal is really important, right? Okay, law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, all right. Now, this is nothing but your individual demand curve, right? This is by one consumer, right, for a good, right? So that's an individual demand curve. Okay, now let's talk about the market demand curve. Okay, what's a market demand curve? Okay, so I'll have market demand curve. Now, market demand curve is nothing but okay. Let's start with an example. Let's say okay, it's summertime in India and we have lots of mangoes, right? So let's assume that there's a market for mangoes. Okay, so market for mangoes is what I'm considering. Okay, all right. We have buyer one, then I have buyer two, okay, and here I have the market. Okay, now let's say that for buyer one, the okay. So let's say for buyer one, I'm giving you this demand curve. Okay, that is I have here is again quantity demanded, and here again is the price, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and $5. Okay, and I give you that at $5, okay, the demand by this buyer is 0, so I have a point here. Then I say at 3, when the price is 3, then the demand is 1. I'll mark this as 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Okay, so when the price is 3, then the demand is 1. I hope you know how to mark the coordinates. Okay, that's 1. And then when the price is 1, the demand is 2. So that's what? When the price is 1, the demand is 2. Okay, I'll join this point. Obviously a straight line, right? So I get this demand curve for, so this is D1, demand curve for buyer 1. All right. Now I'll also have a demand curve for buyer 2. Okay. Similarly, so I'll go with this. So I'll have 1 here. So it's basically you mark it, in line with this so that when we go further for calculating things, it's easier and we get a more accurate, answer. 6 and 7, let's say. Okay. And I have again, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's quantity demanded, and that's the price. Okay, so for buyer 2, let's say at 7, he has a 0 demand at $7. At 5, he has 2. So basically at 5, he has 2. All right. Then at 3, he has 5. At 3 price, he has 5 somewhere here, I believe, right? And then at 1 price, he has 8. So he demands 8 at price 1. Okay. Now this is the demand curve for buyer 2. It should be a much straighter line. I'm so sorry about that. All right. Okay, joining all these points, we get the demand curve for buyer 2. Now, the market demand curve is nothing but the summation of all the individual demand curves. In this case, because of constraint of space, I have just taken 2, but you have n number of buyers in the market, and that's what you add up in order to get a market demand curve. All right. Again, this is quantity demanded, and that's your price. So you will have all the price over here. Wait. So I have to extend this line a bit so that I can get 7. Okay, so again, it would be marked as 7 and then 6 and then 5 and then 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. Okay, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right. Okay, now we just graphically, we just add horizontally, we just add, the numbers or the quantity demanded for all the buyers at various prices. So let's say starting with 7, right? Is there anything for buyer 1 at price 7? No. So it's only 0 for buyer 2. So I'll mark just 0 over here. So again, I'm repeating, it's a horizontal summation of all the individual demand curves in order to get a market demand curve graphically. All right? A horizontal summation. That's how you do it. At price 6, is there anything? No. At price 5, is there anything? Yes. The demand curve for buyer 1 was 0 and for buyer 2 is what? For buyer 2 at price 5 was 2. Is 2. So 2 plus 0 gives me 2. So at price 5, I should have a quantity of 2. All right. Okay. Then at 3, do we have something? Yes, we do. At 3, the buyer 1 was asking for 1 unit and buyer 2 was asking for 5 units, right? So 5 plus 1 gives us 6. So at price 3, I will go for 6 units, right? I will go for 6 units at price 3. And then at price 1, buyer 1 was having 1 quantity demanded and buyer 2 was having 8 quantity demanded, right? So I'll go with the market demand becomes 10. So I have to just increase my number out here. Hang on. Okay. So that's 9 and that's 10, let's say. So at price 1, it's 10. Joining all these points, it has to be a straight line, right? We get the market demand curve, right? That's your market demand curve, right? That's how you actually deduce a market demand curve from all the individual demand curves graphically, horizontal summation. Now, the same thing actually applies to a table as well. So you horizontally add up, for the market demand curve. So if I've given you the price, I'm just writing the table representing the graphs that I have just drawn. So if it's, let's say, your price was 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and your buyer 1 out here, right? So nothing, 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 nothing. At 5, it was 0. At 4, it had nothing. At 3, it had 1. and at 2 it had nothing, at 1 it had 2, right? You can actually go back and cross with and check with the graph. That's what it is for buyer 2. It would be 0 for 7, and then it would be 2 for 5, and then it would be for 3 is it was 5, and for 1 it was 8. And then you just add on horizontally the individual buyers for the market demand, for the market demands for your various prices. So for 7 it would be 0, for 5 it would be 2, for 3 it would be 6, and for 1 it would be 10. Rest you can just leave. All right. This is your market demand in a tabular form, right? Or we also call it the schedule, right? And this, the above one, is nothing but your market demand graphically deduced. So it's again, I'm repeating, the market demand is always the horizontal summation of the individual demands given for a particular product. Okay? All right. And at each price. So at each price, you have to actually do the horizontal summation, right? So at each price, you have to horizontally add, and you get the market demand. Okay? All right. That's your market demand curve. So we have done individual demand curve. We have done what's demand, theoretically, a technical definition. We have done what's demand curve, right? That's the graphical representation. Then we have also deduced demand curve from the concept of marginal utility per dollar, right? And given us the reason why it slopes downwards because of law of diminishing marginal utility. All right, and then we come to your market demand and your market demand curve. Okay, now let's go to something that, I mean, let's just dig in deeper into demand. All right, let's understand what are the factors affecting demand. All right, let's understand what are the factors affecting demand. The first factor, of course, affecting demand that we have already done actually is price. So we have actually done that as price increases of a product, right? As price increases of a product, the quantity demanded decreases for that product, right? And vice versa. So for everything, the factors affecting in both ways, in both directions. Remember that. Even if I don't say or even if I don't write, it means the effect is on the both directions. So if the price goes down, then the quantity demanded increases. So there's an inverse relationship, right? We have already done this and we have already come up with the graph for this. It will be a downward sloping curve like this for price and quantity demanded. Correct? All right. Now, the second factor affecting demand, right, is income. Okay. Now, income, as your income increases, the demand for certain products might go up. All right. As your income increases, it might also happen that the demand for certain product might go down. Okay. Let's see that. Let me explain you with this example with examples that will be much better. So products for which your demand actually increases with the increase in income. So let's say earlier my income uh, was X dollars, right? And I was actually um, going by bus, right? I was a bus rider, so I was going by bus. But as my income increases, then let's say, um, sorry, not this one. My bad. Okay. So if my income is, let's say, with certain amount of income, I have a certain amount of income, and I am demanding a product, let's say, mm, um, cakes. All right. Let's say cakes. So when my income was, let's say my income was $100, I was demanding a certain amount of cake, right? Instead of taking a whole cake, let's say I was taking one piece of pastry, right? So, and that was the demand for pastry, right? All right. As my income increased to, let's say, 150, right, dollars, instead of buying just one pastry, right, I started demanding more of pastries. So demand for pastries increased. From one pastry, I started buying, let's say, three pastries. All right. So these goods for which as your income increases, the demand for those goods increases. If demand for certain goods increases, then those goods are called your normal goods. All right. And the graph for your normal goods would be with respect to income. So I'm drawing now, just remember this, I'm drawing the graph of income and demand for the normal goods. So for those, the demand would be an upward sloping curve. Income level this, I was demanding a certain amount of pastry. As my income increased, I started demanding more pastries. All right. If my demand for certain goods go up with the increase in income, then those goods are termed as normal goods. And the demand curve would be an upward sloping line. Okay. So understand this. Here I'm not taking price at all into consideration. The price of the pastry remains the same. It remains constant. What only changes is my income. So in the second factor, what we are taking into account is the relationship between income and the demand for certain goods. If my income increases, the demand for those goods increases. If that happens, then those goods are termed as normal goods for me. All right. Again, one point over here that I really want to put on is that the definition of a normal good, right? It differs from person to person. For me, let's say the demand for pastry might increase as there is an increase in income. But for person B, the demand for pastry might not increase, or it might decrease as the income increases. Or if person B, let's say, is a diabetic person, so even if the income increases, he will not demand more of pastry, right? So for him, pastry or her, pastry is not a normal good. Okay, because this relationship is not holding true for him or her. So I'm repeating again, only for goods for which if your income increases and the demand for goods also increases, only those goods are termed as normal goods. Okay, underlying the fact that the prices of the goods are constant over here. We are not touching the prices. Okay. However, however, if if your income increases, but the demand for certain goods goes down, right? Then those goods, okay, I'll start with an example. Now, here is what I would actually like to give the bus riding as an example, right? So I got it, I just spoke the answer on the wrong, relationship. Okay, so bus riding, let's say, okay. So let's say I have a certain amount of income and I take bus for going to my office. So I'm a bus rider, right? Okay. But let's say my income from X dollar, right? Earlier it was X dollar, and so I was riding the bus, right? But let's say my income increases from X dollar to, let's say, X plus 100. All right, my income increases from X to X plus 100. Okay, now since my income has gone up, so instead of riding the bus, I might now take Uber, right? Or if my income really increases, then I might have my own car also. I might buy my own car as well, right? So in that case, if I'm looking at my demand for bus ride or buses, right? As my income goes up, then there is a decrease in demand for the buses by me to travel from one place to another as my income has increased. If that's the case, then we term those goods as inferior goods. So, goods for which if the income increases and the demand for those goods decreases, then those goods are termed as inferior goods. Okay, like in this case, I've given you the example of buses. So with a certain level of income, I was riding the bus. The demand for bus was there by me. But when my income increased, then the demand for bus by me went down because I started using Uber, or I started, I took my own car, right? I purchased my own car. So my demand for bus went down with the increase in income. If this is the relationship, if the relationship is inverse with respect to the income of the demand, then we say that the goods we are talking of are inferior goods. Okay? And the graph, obviously, for this with respect to income and demand, right, would be a downward sloping line. Because as the demand curve would be this one. As my income increases, I demand less of bus. As my income decreases, I demand more of bus. All right. Again, I am underlying the fact that the prices are constant over here. Constant. Okay, no change in the prices. We are just looking at the relationship between income and demand for certain products. So again, in conclusion, demand and income, if there is an increase in income and the demand for a product increases, then those termed as normal goods. So again, the other side also goes on. If the income decreases and the demand for certain goods decreases, they are termed as normal goods. As long as there is positive relationship between income and the demand for certain goods, right? They move in the same direction. As long as that happens, they are termed as normal goods, and the demand curve would be an upward sloping line. However, if there is an inverse relationship between income and demand for certain goods, one increases, the other decreases, or if income decreases and the demand for certain goods increases, if there's an inverse relation, then they are termed as inferior goods, like the one that I've given you. And the demand curve for this would be a downward sloping line. All right, that's the second factor. The third factor affecting demand is your prices of related goods. All right. Now, in this also, we have two categories. Okay. Now, prices of related goods is basically we are taking into consideration here two goods. We are taking into consideration here two goods, right? We are taking the price of one good and we are taking the demand for the other good. Okay? That's why the two goods are related, right? So prices of related goods. So price of one good and the demand for the other goods. Okay, what happens? Again, we have the two categories out here. If the price of a good increases and the demand for the other good decreases, okay, let's take an example. So I am taking an example of tea and coffee. All right, very simple one. Okay, very classic example, right? Okay, now let's assume the price of tea increases. So basically, the quantity demanded for tea will go down, right? Now, if for me, I can substitute coffee for tea. If for me it's okay to have coffee instead of tea, since the price of tea has gone up, then I start consuming more of coffee. So my demand for coffee goes up, right? So in this prices of related goods, what we are looking at is the price of tea and how does it affect the demand for coffee. So that's why the price of one good and the demand for the other good. That's what we are looking at, right? We are not looking at the price of tea and the quantity demanded of tea. That we have already done in the first factor. That's the price of the product, right? That's the price of the one product that we are talking. So price of the product and the quantity demanded for the same product. That's the factor. But here what we are looking at is the price of one product and the demand for the other product. Does they have any relationship? If they have a relationship like this, if the price of one product increases and the demand for the other product also increases, I'm sorry about this, so that's increases, right? If it also increases. So if the price of one product increases and the demand for the other product also increases, then this kind of goods are called substitute goods. All right. And again, in this, if I draw the graph, so I will have on my y-axis the price of tea and I will have the demand for coffee. Okay. The graphs are really, really important. So please understand them, right? And the labeling of the graph as well. So for this, I'll have the price of one good and the demand for the other good, right? Or you can also write the quantity of the other good that I demand. Now, if this is the case, if the price of tea increases, so if the price of tea was this, let's say my quantity, my demand for coffee was certain level at this, but as the price of tea increases, right, if it increases from this to this, then my demand for coffee also increases from here to here. So it goes up over here. So I will have an upward sloping demand curve. Do you understand? Right? So for substitute goods, the demand curve would be like this. Again, I'm repeating, it would be the price of one good and the demand for the other good. All right? So if there is a positive relation between the price of one good and the demand for the other good, then those two goods are termed as substitute goods. Okay. However, if I have the price of one good increases, but the demand for the other good decreases, then what happens, right? So let's say I have an example of, let's say I have an example of car and gas. All right. Let's say the price of gas increases. Okay. Or let me put it the other way around. Okay. Okay. So let's say that, because this is an easier way to understand. Okay. Let's say the price of car increases in the market. All right. So it basically means the quantity demanded for car will go down, right? Inverse relationship between the price of a product and the quantity demanded for that product. Now, once the quantity demanded for car goes down, basically, then the demand for gas also goes down, because less cars means less demand for gas, right? So, there's an inverse relationship between your price of car and your price of car and the demand for gas. So this is what we are looking at. The price of one good and the demand for the other good. Now here they have an inverse relationship. If the price of one good increases, the demand for the other good decreases. If that happens, right? If that happens, then these goods are termed as complementary goods, right? Or complements, right? So that's what this is. Prices of related goods, right? You can have other examples as well. For substitute goods, you can also say, two goods, like let's say for me, right? I'm saying for myself. For me, let's say sweaters and sweatshirts are substitute goods. So if the price of sweaters increases, I will move to sweatshirts. So my demand for sweatshirts increase, right? And that is why for me, those two goods are substitute goods. Again, I'm underlying the fact that this might differ from person to person. One good, which is a substitute, two goods, I mean, which are substitute goods for me, might not be substitute goods for some other person. All right. Similarly, two goods which are complements for me might not be complementary goods for some other person. Right. So this is where, economics and science differs. Science is a fact which is true for all. Economics, since it's a behavioral thing, right, it keeps on changing from person to person. So for sure short, we cannot say that, okay, two goods are really substitute goods for everyone. They might not be. All right. It differs from person to person. Okay, complementary goods could be your pen and ink, or refills, and then complementary goods could be your let's say laptop and softwares, right? So they go hand in hand. Goods that go basically hand in hand. Now in this case, the graph will be what? Since there's an inverse relation, right? So I have price of cars over here, and I have quantity of gas over here, or demand for gas over here, and it will be a downward sloping curve, right? Since there's an inverse relationship. All right. Okay. And the fourth factor affecting your demand, which is actually also very important, are your tastes and preferences. Okay. If there is a change in taste, if there is a change in preference for particular product or a service by consumers, then yes, the demand changes, and accordingly the supply also changes, right? So yes, taste and preferences play a very, very important role actually in real world. Okay, so the fifth factor affecting the demand is expectations. All right, expectations about prices. So if I'm expecting the price of the product to go up in future, price to increase in future, right? What will happen to my current demand? My current demand will go up, right? Because I'm expecting a price of a product to go in future, and so my current demand will go up. So let's say if I expect price of air conditioners to go up in future, right? Because summers are coming, then my current demand for ACs or air conditioners will go up, right? Similarly, if I am expecting prices to go down in future, then what will happen? If I'm expecting prices to go down in future, then I'll hold back my demand right now and I will buy more stuff in future. So my demand in future will increase. All right. Now this is very much real, and this you can actually see in your experience in your everyday life also. It's a very good factor affecting your demand. Apart from, generally we take into consideration the price and the income, but apart from these, though they are very, very important, but expectations, they play a very important role in demand, right? And giving us the direction of the demand as well as the taste and preferences. All right. Now, two more, a very little subtopics kind related to demand, or two or three terminologies basically, right, that I really want to share with you, and which are very important and which actually come as an MCQ in your APs. So one is your change in quantity demanded versus change in demand. Okay, this triangle signs denotes delta, so change, right? Change in quantity demanded, we use this only when we are referring to change in the quantity demanded with respect to price. With respect to price. So if the price of the product is changing, then I will use this terminology that there is a change in quantity demanded for a product. So always remember, whenever I'm using the terminology change in quantity demanded, it is with reference to the change in price. The change in demand is used when we are considering or with reference to the change in all other factors except price. All right. So if I'm saying that there is change in income, which is leading to change in demand, I will not say change in quantity demanded. That's what I'm trying to make a difference between. Okay. So it's always the change in demand. If I'm using this terminology, it means that I'm talking of change in demand due to change in any of the factors except price. So it could be the change in demand, it could be the change in related goods prices, it could be change in taste and preferences, it could be change in expectations. Okay? Very important terminologies. You do get an MCQ on this. Okay. Then we have the last thing that I really want to discuss is one is your movement along the demand curve. What do you mean by this? So this basically refers to when I am saying that there is a change in price leading to a change in quantity demanded, right? This gives you movement along the demand curve. I'm moving from point this to point this to point this to point this. It's a movement along the demand curve. All right. That is always with reference to change in the price of the product with respect to the change in the quantity demanded for that product. Okay. The other one is if I am talking of shifts in demand curve. Okay. If I am talking of, give me 1 minute. Okay. If I am talking of shifts in demand curve. All right. The shifts in demand curve are always with respect to other factors but price and not price. So I have this demand curve, right? If you remember when I was talking about factors affecting demand, other than the price, I was saying for all the other factors, I was saying that the price was constant, right? And I have to plot that on the price quantity demanded curve, right? I mean graph. So let's say I'm talking about a factor, income. I'm saying that my income changes and the demand for the product also changes. Let's say it increases. So let's have a positive relationship. If income increases, then let's say the demand for a product also increases. If I have to plot this on a price quantity demanded graph, how will I do that? Okay. Since the price is constant in this, so I will just show the increase in the demand by moving my demand curve towards right. Okay. If there is a decrease in the income, and because of that, the demand for a product decreases, I will show that with a leftward shift in my parallel shift in my demand curve. At the same price level, because prices are not playing any role over here. They are constant. So the bottom line being that a rightward shift in the demand curve means increase in the demand with respect to all other factors except price. So if, let's say, if the taste and preferences of a particular good increases, right, then if I have to depict that increase in the demand, then there would be a rightward shift in the demand curve. If I have to depict a decrease in the demand due to any other factors except price, then there would be a leftward shift. So a leftward shift in the demand curve means decrease in demand with respect to all other factors except price. All right, that's very important because it will come again and again. It will come in changes in equilibrium. So a rightward shift in the demand curve means the increase in demand due to any factor except price. A leftward shift in the demand curve means a decrease in demand due to any of the factors except price. If we have to see the change in quantity demanded with respect to price, then we are talking about movement along the demand curve. All right. Okay, so with this, I'm done for today, right? But I'll give you 3 MCQs on this. Okay, that's the first one. Economists have observed that when average incomes increase, purchases of fast food tend to decline. Based on this information, what can we definitely say about fast food? These are your options. The second one is meats and blobs are two goods that are related to each other. When the price of meats goes down, the demand for blobs goes down. Based only on the information given here, what kinds of goods are meats and blobs? And the third is this. Which of the following movements would represent an increase in the demand for a good? So a blue mark doesn't mean that it's a right answer. Okay. I discuss the answers in the next piece. All right. Until then, bye-bye.